The alarm for a structure fire doesn't ask if you're ready. For volunteer firefighter and single dad Mike Rivera, it tore through the quiet of his kitchen, where he was packing his daughter's lunch for tomorrow. The address scrolling across his pager was the one that turns every parent's blood to ice. Little Sprouts Daycare. What happened in the next 20 minutes would be hailed as heroism. But when the CEO mother arrived to the scene of flashing lights and smoke, her scream wasn't just about her daughter. It was the shock of recognizing the soot-covered man holding her child, the same man she had fired just 4 weeks ago. Mike Rivera was living a version of the American dream that had started to fracture. A dedicated volunteer with the Oak Ridge Fire Department, his world revolved around his 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, and the shifts he pulled between construction jobs. 4 weeks ago, that fragile balance was shattered when a corporate downsizing at Tech Vanguard, led by CEO Elena Vance, eliminated his position as a facilities manager. Now standing in the acrid smoke of a burning daycare, holding Elena Vance's daughter, he was facing the woman who had ended his livelihood. This is the story of that impossible collision, a moment where a hero and the person who made him feel powerless would meet in the flames. To understand the weight of that moment in the smoke, you have to rewind 4 weeks to a Tuesday morning that felt like an ending. Mike Rivera's life was built on a foundation of predictable routines. The 5 a.m. alarm, the quiet making of coffee while his daughter Chloe slept, the drive to his construction job where he operated heavy machinery for 10 hours, then 3 evenings a week and every other weekend, he traded his tool belt for turnout gear at the Oak Ridge Volunteer Fire Department, Station 9. It was a relentless schedule, but it worked. It paid the mortgage on their small, yellow-sided house. It covered Chloe's after-school care. It was the engine of a life he was proud of, built alone since Chloe's mother left when she was just a baby. But the second job, the one that provided health insurance and stability, was at Tech Vanguard's gleaming corporate campus. For 6 years, Mike was their facilities manager. He knew every hum of the HVAC system, every flicker in the lighting grid. He was the guy who fixed the leak before the CEO's meeting, who quietly restocked the printer paper, who made the invisible machinery of a $50 million company run smoothly. Until he was summoned to a sterile conference room named after a mountain peak and told, in the calm language of restructuring, that his position was being eliminated. The psychological impact of termination is profound. Research shows it triggers a devastating loss of professional identity, a deep-seated shame, and a retreat from social connections. For Mike, it was a silent earthquake. He drove home that day, the severance packet on the passenger seat feeling like a verdict, and had to explain to his 6-year-old that Daddy would be home more often now, which was technically true, but felt like a lie. The first bill he couldn't pay was the one for Chloe's gymnastics class. Across town, Elena Vance was navigating a different kind of pressure. As the newly promoted CEO of Tech Vanguard, her mandate from the board was clear: streamline, optimize, increase shareholder value. The facilities department outsourcing was line item 7 in a 200-page efficiency report. The decision was clinical financial. To her, Mike Rivera was an employee ID number, a salary plus benefits line that could be reduced by contracting out. She signed the reduction in force authorization without a second thought, her focus on the upcoming quarterly earnings call. She was a woman who solved for X, and in that equation, human variables were often rounded down. For Mike, the following weeks were a scramble in the quiet. He picked up extra construction shifts where he could. He cut every non-essential cost. The worry was a constant, low-frequency hum behind his sternum, a sound he tried to shield Chloe from. His one sanctuary, his one source of unshakable purpose, remained the firehouse. In that bay with the trucks and his crew, he wasn't a laid-off facilities manager. He was Firefighter Rivera. He was capable. He was needed. Then came the Thursday of the fire. It was Mike's day with Chloe. They made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. He was packing her lunch for school the next day, a ritual he clung to when the digital shriek of his county-issued pacer tore through the domestic calm. His body moved before his mind processed it. Years of training took over. He dropped the sandwich bag, kissed the top of Chloe's head with a hurried, "Uncle Marcus is on his way, be good," and was out the door, pulling his volunteer department shirt on over his t-shirt. In the truck, the address came through on the radio. His blood went cold. 267 Maple Avenue. He knew that address. Every parent in Oak Ridge did. Little Sprouts Daycare. The dispatcher's voice, tense, reported multiple calls, visible smoke from the structure. The average daycare in America sees about 1,200 fires a year. In that moment, statistics evaporated. There was only the address, the smoke, and the crushing certainty that children were inside. Mike was the second volunteer on scene. The first engine from the professional crew was just arriving. The picture was already horrifying. Thick, oily smoke poured from the roof vents of the single-story building. Flames licked at the rear windows. The frantic director, her face streaked with tears, was screaming to the first arriving captain, "We got most out. The checklist, we did the checklist. But Sophie and Liam, they're in the back nap room. I could the smoke." The captain was barking orders, laying hose lines. The nap room was in the rear, cut off by the main body of the fire. The primary search team was gearing up, but it would take time to push through the heat. Time those kids didn't have. Mike scanned the building. His eyes landed on a small, high window in the back, a bathroom window. It was barely wider than his shoulders. Without hose lines protecting him, entering was a flagrant violation of protocol. It was also, he calculated in a split second, the only direct path. He didn't announce it. He just ran, around the side of the building, through a choked backyard play area. He used a plastic playscape to boost himself up, smashed the window glass with the Halligan tool in his hand, and squeezed into the choking, absolute blackness inside. The heat was a physical wall. The smoke was so thick it felt liquid. Dropping to the floor where the air was marginally better, he crawled, one hand tracing the wall, the other out in front of him. He called out, his voice muffled by his shirt. No answer. The nap room. He had to find the nap room. His training fought through the panic. Door frames, hallway. Then his outstretched hand touched a tiny sneaker. He found them huddled together under a small table, 2 5-year-olds, unconscious from smoke inhalation. Not knowing if they were alive, but refusing to believe otherwise, he acted. He grabbed the first child, a boy, carried him back the way he came, and passed the limp form out the window to a firefighter who had seen him enter and followed. He went back into the deepening heat for the second child, a little girl, her blonde hair fanned out. He gathered her against his chest, her head lolling on his shoulder, and turned to make the desperate crawl back to the window. As he emerged into the blinding daylight, soot-covered, coughing, handing the girl to waiting paramedics, the first wave of professional crews breached the front door. The fire was knocked down in minutes. On the lawn, surrounded by the chaos of ambulances and evacuating children, Mike knelt, sucking in clean air, watching the paramedics work. Oxygen masks, the gentle rise of a small chest. They were alive. It was then, as the adrenaline began to recede, that he heard a new sound cutting through the din. A raw, shattered scream, not of panic, but of recognition. He looked up, pushing past a police line, her designer heels stumbling on the wet grass, her face a mask of utter terror morphing into something else entirely, was Elena Vance. And she was staring directly at him, at the soot-stained man cradling her daughter, her mouth open in a silent, devastating O of shock. In the frozen silence between them, the world narrowed to a single, impossible point of connection. Elena Vance took one stumbling step forward, then another, her CEO composure shattered. "Sophie, is that Mike?" Her voice was a whisper ripped raw. Mike, still on his knees, could only nod, his arms tightening instinctively around the little girl as a paramedic gently pried her from his grip to place her on a gurney. He watched Elena fall to her knees beside her daughter, her hands fluttering over Sophie's soot-smudged face, checking for life, her earlier scream dissolving into choked, silent tears. The scene around them continued in frenetic motion, hoses spraying, radios crackling, other children being comforted, but for a 10-yard radius, a strange, static bubble had formed. The fire captain, a veteran named Gregson, approached Mike, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Rivera, that was something else. You know you broke every protocol in the book, right?" Before Mike could answer, Captain Gregson's eyes flicked to the weeping woman by the gurney. "You know her." Mike stood up slowly, his joints protesting. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving behind the gritty reality of soot in his teeth and a profound weariness. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. "That's Elena Vance. She was my boss, up until 4 weeks ago." Captain Gregson's eyebrows shot up, 1,000 questions forming in his expression, but he just shook his head and walked toward the incident command post. The unspoken truth hung in the air. The hero of the hour and the mother of the saved child had a history, and it wasn't a good one. The next hour was a blur of mandatory procedures. Oxygen for Mike, a debrief with department investigators about his unauthorized entry. Through it all, his eyes kept tracking Elena. He watched her ride in the ambulance with Sophie to Oak Ridge General. He saw the news vans arrive, their satellite dishes sprouting like metallic mushrooms. By the time he was released from the scene, the first social media posts were already live. Grainy cell phone footage of a soot-covered firefighter emerging from a window with a child. The caption read, "Local hero saves kids from daycare inferno." But Mike didn't go to the hospital. He went home. His brother Marcus was there, having rushed over to watch Chloe. The moment Mike walked through the door, Chloe launched herself at his legs. "Daddy, you're all dirty. Were you at a fire?" He hugged her, the scent of smoke clinging to him, and felt a tremor run through his body that had nothing to do with the heat he'd faced. He was safe. His daughter was safe. The two children were, according to the radio chatter he'd heard, in stable condition. So why did he feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff? The answer came the next morning. It started with a local news segment at 7 a.m., praising the bravery of the Oak Ridge Fire Department and the mysterious volunteer who made the daring rescue. By 9, a reporter had dug into the county's volunteer roster and put a name to the face, Michael Rivera. By 10, someone in the Tech Vanguard accounting department, having seen the news, made the connection to the recent layoffs and posted about it on a private Facebook group. It took less than an hour for that detail to leak to a digital news blogger. The headline hit at 11:47 a.m. Fired last month, hero today, CEO's LAYOFF recipient saves her daughter from fire. The article was a potent mix of fact and emotionally charged narrative. It featured a photo of Mike from the fire department's website and a professional headshot of Elena Vance from Tech Vanguard's corporate page. It mentioned the downsizing. It quoted anonymous sources about the cold efficiency of the termination. The viral calculus was perfect. A relatable hero, a seemingly heartless corporate villain, and a child's life in the balance. In her corner office on the 12th floor of Tech Vanguard Tower, Elena Vance was facing a different kind of firestorm. Sophie was home, scared but physically okay, sleeping under the watch of a private nurse. Elena's guilt was a physical weight, a nausea she couldn't suppress. It wasn't just the terror of nearly losing her daughter. It was the horrifying, unignorable collision of her two worlds. The boardroom, where she made cutthroat decisions to maximize profit, and the primal, human world where a man she had cast aside had risked everything for what she held most dear. Her public relations director was in her office, pale. "The narrative is catastrophic, Elena. It's not just a local story anymore. It's trending nationally. The optics, a single father, a volunteer firefighter, laid off by a wealthy CEO, and then he saves her child. It's a scriptwriter's dream, and our nightmare." The board chairman had called twice. Share prices for Tech Vanguard had dipped 3% in pre-market trading on the rumor. Elena stared at the news article on her monitor. The photo of Mike Rivera, his face calm and streaked with grime, holding her daughter. She had replayed the moment of recognition 100 times. The psychology of rescue is complex. Survivors and their families can experience overwhelming gratitude, but also a profound, destabilizing sense of debt and shame. Elena was drowning in both. She made a decision. Get me his contact information. Everything. Address, phone, anything. And draft a statement, a personal one, from me. Meanwhile, in his small kitchen, Mike was trying to explain the internet to his 6-year-old. His phone had been buzzing incessantly, unknown numbers, texts from old friends, interview requests. He'd ignored them all until his fire captain called. "Mike, the department's getting swarmed. The chief is getting pressure to give you a commendation, but also questions about your insubordination. The media wants a piece of you. My advice, lay low for a day, but there's something else. Tech Vanguard's PR machine is revving up. I think they're going to try to contact you." Mike felt a slow-burning anger replace the numbness. He was a story to them, a pawn in a PR game. The man who'd saved a life was now being reduced to a symbol in a narrative about corporate guilt. He looked at Chloe, coloring at the table, oblivious. His debt was growing. The mortgage was due. The shame of termination that researchers describe, the feeling of being discarded, of worthlessness, had been momentarily washed away by the rescue. But now it was creeping back, mixed with a new resentment. He didn't want to be their redemption arc. The first attempt was an email from a Tech Vanguard corporate address expressing Elena Vance's profound gratitude and requesting a meeting at his earliest convenience to personally thank him. Mike deleted it. The second was a phone call from a smooth-talking executive assistant offering to send a car for him. He declined. The third attempt came at 4 p.m. when a sleek black sedan pulled up outside his house. Mike watched from the window as Elena Vance herself, without an assistant or publicist, stepped out. She was wearing not a power suit, but dark jeans and a sweater. She looked, for the first time he had ever seen, uncertain. She walked to his front door and knocked. Mike's first instinct was to not answer, but Chloe, curious, yelled, "Daddy, someone's here." He took a deep breath, the scent of smoke still faint in his hair, and opened the door. They stood facing each other again, but the context had shifted entirely. No smoke, no sirens, just the quiet of his modest street and the vast, awkward canyon of their history. "Mike," she began, her voice quiet, I don't even know where to start. What you did for Sophie," she trailed off, gathering herself. "May I come in, just for a moment?" Against his better judgment, he stepped aside. She entered, her eyes taking in the lived-in comfort of the home, the toys, the crayon drawings on the fridge, the faint smell of coffee. It was the environment of the man she'd classified as a cost-saving measure. Chloe peered around the corner. "Hello," Elena said, forcing a smile. "Hi," Chloe said, before disappearing back into the living room. Elena turned to Mike. "I'm here for 2 reasons. To thank you from the bottom of my soul. You gave me back my daughter. And 2, to apologize for what happened at Tech Vanguard. The decision, it was financial. It was never personal." Mike crossed his arms. "It's always personal when it's your job, when it's your kid's gymnastics class. You were a signature on a form to me. I was a line item to you. Now, because of a fire, we're in each other's living rooms." He let the statement hang heavy in the air. Elena nodded, accepting the blow. "I understand, I can't change the past, but I want to make it right. I've spoken to the board. We want to offer you your job back, with a promotion, a significant raise, full reinstatement of benefits, retroactive to your termination date." It was a staggering offer, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. It solved every practical problem he had. The mortgage, the bills, the worry, but it felt like poison. It felt like hush money. It felt like she was buying absolution, and in doing so, cheapening what he had done. The rescue hadn't been for her, it had been for the child. Accepting this would tangle those motives forever. "I don't want my job back," Mike said, the words surprising even him. Elena blinked. "Mike, please consider it. This isn't just about public relations. This is about doing what's right." "Is it?" he asked. "Or is it about making the bad headline go away? You don't get it. That job, after the way it ended, it's not mine anymore. You can't just glue it back together and expect it to hold." He saw a flash of frustration cross her face, the CEO accustomed to fixing problems with offers and incentives. "Then what will you accept?" she asked, a hint of her boardroom steel returning. "A monetary reward, a donation to the fire department, name it." And there it was, the pivot, the moment the personal collision turned into a negotiation. Mike realized this wasn't a conversation between a grateful mother and her daughter's rescuer. It was a transaction being proposed by a CEO to a liability. The profound human debt she felt was being processed through her only available framework, deal-making. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was Captain Gregson again. He picked it up. "Rivera, you need to come down to the station now, and you might want to bring a lawyer." The station house, usually a place of camaraderie and worn leather couches, felt like a courthouse. Captain Gregson wasn't alone. Sitting across from him in the cluttered office were 2 men in crisp, dark suits, one from the Oak Ridge Fire Department's Internal Affairs Division, and the other, a senior attorney representing the city's risk management and legal department. The air was thick with a formality that made Mike's still sooty turnout gear feel like a costume. "Mike, take a seat," Gregson said, his voice uncharacteristically flat. "This is not a disciplinary hearing, yet. It's a fact-finding inquiry, but given the circumstances, the city's legal team is involved. The attorney, a man named Dryden, steepled his fingers. Mr. Rivera, we need to walk through your actions at the Maple Avenue incident with extreme precision. You were the second volunteer on scene, correct? For the next hour, they dissected his every move, the timeline, his entry point, his awareness of the established incident command. The attorney's questions were meticulously designed to highlight one fact: Mike had acted alone, without communication, and in direct contradiction to the incident commander's strategy. You understand, Mr. Rivera, that while the outcome was positive, your actions created significant liability for the department and the city. Had you become trapped, it would have required a rescue operation, diverting resources. Had a structural collapse occurred, the city could be held responsible for your unauthorized actions. Mike felt the ground shifting beneath him. The hero narrative was being dismantled, brick by bureaucratic brick, and replaced with a case study in operational liability. 2 children were unconscious, Mike said, his voice tight. The primary search line was held up at the front. There was no time. Your perception of time is not the established protocol, Dryden replied coolly. The department is considering a temporary suspension pending a full review. Additionally, the daycare's insurance carrier has already initiated a preliminary inquiry. They are looking at all angles of the event, including the response. The wait, it gets worse moment came next. Captain Gregson slid a printed email across the desk. It was from the State Fire Marshal's office. The cause of the Little Sprouts fire had been determined: faulty wiring in a wall outlet behind an overstuffed bookcase, a violation that should have been caught in the daycare's last annual safety inspection. That inspection, the email noted, had been conducted 8 months prior by a third-party contractor. The name of that contractor was Sentinel Safety Compliance, a wholly owned subsidiary of Tech Vanguard Enterprises. Mike looked up from the paper, the connection clicking into place with a sickening clarity. Elena Vance's company was financially linked to the very violation that had nearly killed her daughter. The story, already a national sensation, now had jet fuel. CEO's firm failed to catch hazard in DAYCAITHAT burned was the next day's headline. The narrative spiraled from a heartwarming rescue tale into a full-blown corporate scandal. Tech Vanguard's stock plummeted 7% in a single day. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Protesters, mobilized by online campaigns, gathered outside Tech Vanguard Tower with signs reading "Profits over Safety" and "VANCE must GO." Elena's world was collapsing from the inside out. The guilt over Mike, the terror over Sophie, was now compounded by a monumental professional catastrophe. The subsidiary was a small, overlooked part of the tech conglomerate's portfolio, acquired years before her tenure. She never reviewed its inspection reports. But as CEO, the buck stopped with her. The board's message was clear. She had 1 week to control the narrative and mitigate the damage, or they would initiate a vote of no confidence. In the eye of this hurricane, Mike was adrift. The fire department placed him on administrative leave, with pay, until the internal review was complete. The media camped at the end of his street. The offered job from Elena was a non-starter, now tainted by the subsidiary revelation. He felt used by fate, a pawn in a drama that was stripping away the only identity he had left, Firefighter Rivera. He couldn't even go to the station. It was his daughter, Chloe, who unknowingly handed him a compass. A local news station had run a segment about the daycare's displaced children and their families, many of whom were struggling to find new, affordable care. The segment ended with a plea for community support. Chloe, watching with him, had looked up and asked, "Daddy, where will the kids go now? They don't have a school." Her question echoed in his head. He had skills, he had time, and he had a profound, first-hand understanding of what those families had just endured. An idea, fragile and audacious, began to form. It started with a phone call to his brother Marcus, then to a few trusted guys from his construction crew, then to Captain Gregson, who after a long pause said, "The department can't officially sanction it, but as a private citizen, I'll make some calls." Meanwhile, Elena was deploying every corporate tool at her disposal. Press conferences with carefully worded apologies, a promise of a full, independent audit of Sentinel safety compliance, a 7-figure donation to a burn victims' charity. But the public, and more importantly the board, saw it as damage control, not contrition. Her attempts to reach Mike again went unanswered. Her PR director advised a new strategy: separation. We need to decouple you from Rivera in the public's mind. Let his story fade. Focus on the corporate reforms. But Alina found she couldn't. The image of him on his knees, holding Sophie, was seared into her mind. It was no longer just about debt or headlines. It was about the staggering gap between the man she judged as expendable and the man he had proven to be. In a moment of defiant clarity, she overruled her team. She called an emergency meeting of the Tech Vanguard Foundation, the company's charitable arm, and directed them to establish a grant program for displaced first responders facing financial hardship. She named it the Rivera Resiliency Fund. It was a massive, public gesture, and it was universally interpreted as a cynical, guilt-driven publicity stunt. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Commentators accused her of trying to buy a hero's silence. Mike, when a reporter shouted the question at him outside his home, simply shook his head and said, "No comment." His silence was more damning than any rant. The tension between public perception and private reality was becoming unsustainable. And then the catalyst arrived. It was a certified letter from the law firm representing the parents of Liam, the little boy Mike had pulled from the fire. They were filing a civil lawsuit against the daycare, its insurers, Sentinel Safety Compliance, and the Oak Ridge Fire Department. And in a stunning legal maneuver, they had also named Michael Rivera as a co-defendant. The claim was staggering in its implication. By conducting an unauthorized, reckless rescue, Mike had potentially exacerbated Liam's injuries, a claim the hospital records didn't support, but that would take months and thousands of dollars in legal fees to disprove. The lawsuit was a naked attempt to cast a wide net for liability, but for Mike, it was the ultimate betrayal. He had risked his life, and now he was being sued for it. The letter broke something in him. The stress, the limbo, the injustice of it all boiled over. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his brother. He got in his truck and drove, not thinking, just moving. He found himself turning into the gated community where Alina Vance lived. He parked outside the imposing modern facade of her house, marched up the walk, and rang the bell. When she opened the door, her face was pale with surprise. "Mike." "Everyone wants a piece of this story," he said, his voice trembling with a fury he could no longer contain. "The department, the city, the lawyers, the media. Your company's mistake almost killed my kids' classmates, and now I'm being sued because I tried to stop it. You offered me my job back like it was a prize. You started a fund with my name on it like I'm a charity case. You don't get to fix this with money and press releases. You don't get to buy your way out of this feeling." He was shouting now, months of compressed anger erupting. "Look at what your world does. It takes a man who saves a life and turns him into a problem to be managed." Alina stood frozen, absorbing the torrent. She didn't offer a defense. She didn't call security. When he finished, chest heaving, there was a long, charged silence. Then she did something he didn't expect. She stepped aside. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Come inside, please." He stood on her threshold, the storm of his anger spent, leaving only the exhausted truth beneath it. After a long moment, Mike stepped inside. The interior of Alina's home was all clean lines and soft, expensive light, a world away from his own cluttered comfort. They stood in the vast, quiet living room, the tension between them no longer explosive, but heavy and palpable. "Can I get you a glass of water?" Alina asked, her CEO persona completely absent. She just looked tired. Mike shook his head. "Why did you ask me in?" "Because you're the only person who isn't lying to me," she said simply. "My board is lying about their support. The media is lying about their motives. My PR team is lying about what this will take to fix. You told me the truth. It's the only thing I have to work with right now." She walked to a large window overlooking the city. "The lawsuit naming you is grotesque. My general counsel told me about it this morning. He said it's a standard scattershot tactic, that you'll almost certainly be dismissed from it. But almost certainly isn't good enough, is it? Not when it's your life." She turned to face him. "I will have Tech Vanguard's legal team represent you at company expense to secure your dismissal from that suit. No strings. It's not an offer, it's a fact. You can hire your own lawyer to watch them do it." Mike was taken aback. It was the first thing she'd said that didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like an attempt at justice. Why? Because you shouldn't be punished for saving my daughter, she said, her voice cracking. And because everything you yelled is correct. I have been trying to manage a feeling. A terrible, sickening feeling that started the moment I saw you in the smoke. I thought I could resolve it with a job offer or a charitable fund. I was wrong. She sat down on the edge of a sleek sofa, looking suddenly small. That subsidiary, Sentinel, I never reviewed its operations. It was a line item, a tiny, profitable line item. My focus was on the core tech divisions, on stock performance. I delegated the non-core assets to subordinates, and that delegation nearly killed my child. It put other children in danger. It made a hero into a defendant. She looked up at him. How do you fix that? The question hung in the quiet room. Mike finally sat down in a chair opposite her. You don't fix it, he said, his voice quieter now. You just start doing the next right thing, and you don't do it for the press. And what is the next right thing? She asked, genuinely asking. Mike told her about the idea that had been forming since his talk with Chloe. The displaced daycare kids, the lack of immediate, safe options for their families, his skills, his crew, his brother. There's a vacant storefront on Elm Street near the old community center. The owner's a friend of my captain's. He'd lease it for $1 a month to a good cause. We could make it safe. We could build a temporary, hyper-secure play space so those families have somewhere to go tomorrow, not in 6 months. But it needs materials. It needs permits fast-tracked. It needs things I don't have. Elena listened, her analytical mind engaging on a new problem, not a PR problem, a logistics problem, a people problem. What would it need? She asked. For the next hour, they talked not as former employer and employee, not as celebrity, victim and hero, but as two capable people with complementary skills. Mike knew construction, safety codes, and what kids needed. Elena knew how to navigate bureaucracies, mobilize resources, and cut through red tape. She took notes on her phone, asking precise questions about square footage, fire suppression, licensing. The dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The following morning, Elena Vance walked into the Tech Vanguard board meeting and did not present a new PR strategy. She presented a project plan. She outlined the immediate material support the company would provide to establish the Elm Street Interim Care Center. She committed corporate volunteers, a direct grant for materials, and the full weight of the company's legal and government affairs team to expedite permitting. She also announced the immediate sale of the Sentinel Safety Compliance subsidiary, with all proceeds to be placed in a trust for the families affected by the fire. The board was stunned. This wasn't reputation management, it was tangible, costly action. One director called it a distracted misuse of corporate focus. Elena's reply was firm. Our corporate focus created this collateral damage. We will not manage the narrative, we will repair the damage. So the project leaked, but this time, the narrative struggled to find a cynical angle. Reporters showed up at the dusty storefront on Elm Street to find Mike Rivera, his brother Marcus, and 3 of his construction buddies already tearing out old drywall. They were joined by Tech Vanguard employees in jeans and t-shirts, moving materials. Captain Gregson was there too, in civilian clothes, consulting on emergency egress routes. When asked, Mike simply said, "The kids need a place. We are building it." The civil lawsuit against Mike was dismissed within 3 weeks, after Tech Vanguard's aggressive legal team demonstrated the rescue's medical necessity. The fire department's internal review concluded with a formal reprimand for Mike's protocol violation, but was paired with a formal commendation for exceptional bravery, a contradictory but honest reflection of the event. His administrative leave was lifted. The Elm Street Center opened in a remarkable 28 days. It wasn't fancy, but it was bright, safe, and overflowing with donated toys. The opening day was a quiet community affair, no major press releases. Mike stood with his crew. Elena stood with a few of her senior staff who had volunteered. Sophie, Elena's daughter, now recovered, clung to her mother's hand. When she saw Mike across the room, she pointed and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mommy, that's my firefighter." The moment was unplanned, pure, and cut through every remaining layer of complexity. Mike walked over and knelt down. "Hey, Sophie, you like the new place?" She nodded shyly. "It has more windows." "Yeah," Mike said, "lots of windows." He stood up and found himself facing Elena. There were no cameras, no boards, no audiences, just the noise of playing children filling the space they had built. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for her." Mike nodded. "You built it too." A few weeks later, Elena resigned as CEO of Tech Vanguard. The board accepted it, with a generous severance package she did not keep. In her resignation statement, she wrote, "I have learned that some costs do not belong on a balance sheet, and some repairs require more than capital." The surprising detail, buried in the financial disclosures, was that she used a significant portion of her severance to personally fund a permanent endowment for the Elm Street Center, ensuring its survival long after the temporary need had passed. Mike returned to full duty at the firehouse, his standing with his crew solidified not just by the rescue, but by the work he'd led afterwards. He started a small, independent contracting business, specializing in safety renovations for community spaces. His first client was a referral from a former Tech Vanguard facilities manager. The story of the fire, the rescue, the clash, and the unlikely project did not have a fairy tale ending. Mike and Elena did not become friends. Their worlds were too different, their history too stained. But they achieved something rarer, a settled peace. They had moved from being archetypes in a viral news story, the heartless CEO, the noble blue-collar hero, into being complicated, flawed people who had faced a terrible moment and chosen, haltingly, to build something good from its ashes. One afternoon the following October, Mike was driving Chloe home from school. They passed the now-closed Little Sprouts daycare building, its windows boarded. A for-lease sign was staked in the lawn. "Daddy," Chloe asked from the back seat, "that's where the fire was, right?" "Yeah, kiddo, that's the place." "Are you still mad at Sophie's mom?" Mike considered the question, watching the building recede in his mirror. "No," he said honestly, "I'm not mad." "Good," Chloe declared, satisfied, "because Sophie's nice. She shares her markers." Mike smiled. In the simplicity of his daughter's world, the complex equation of guilt, debt, and redemption solved for a single, clean variable, marker sharing. He drove on past the corner where his life and Elena Vance's had violently intersected. The road ahead was just a road leading home. The sirens, the headlines, the lawsuits, and the negotiations were receding into the past, leaving behind the tangible, quiet proof of a community space filled with light, and the unshakable knowledge that when the alarm had sounded, he had chosen to run toward the fire. And so the viral story that began with a scream of recognition on a smoke-filled lawn finds its quiet end on an ordinary street, in an ordinary truck, carrying a man who was never ordinary home. We are drawn to these stories, the fired employee who becomes the hero, the powerful executive brought low by circumstance, because they fit a clean, satisfying arc. They allow us to cast characters, the noble working man, the cold corporate titan. We watch, waiting for the moral to be delivered, for the villain to be humbled, and the hero to be rewarded. But the truth, as this story reveals, is always messier. It lives in the spaces between those archetypes. It lives in the shame of job loss that has nothing to do with worth, and the lonely pressure of leadership that mistakes efficiency for wisdom. It lives in the terrifying, selfless instinct to run toward a fire, and the equally terrifying, humbling journey required to walk back out of the smoke of one's own making. Mike Rivera and Elena Vance did not exchange places. They did not become best friends. The world does not work in such neat swaps. Instead, they were both irrevocably changed by a single searing point of intersection. He learned that heroism has bureaucratic consequences and that the act of saving does not guarantee gratitude. She learned that leadership divorced from humanity is a dangerous abstraction and that some debts cannot be paid, only honored through action. Their story asks a lingering question of us all. In a world quick to judge and label, what do we miss in the spaces between? What complex, contradictory humanity is flattened when we reduce people to headlines, to a laid-off firefighter or a cutthroat CEO? The Elm Street Center still stands. Children play there. The lawsuit faded. The news cycles moved on. The real resolution was not captured in a final headline. It was built quietly in the choice to pick up a hammer instead of a microphone, in the decision to fund an endowment instead of fighting a scandal, in the hard, unglamorous work of making something useful from the wreckage. Some stories end with a dramatic verdict or a triumphant return. This one ends with a simple daily truth. We are all more than the worst thing that has happened to us, and more than the best thing we have ever done. We contain multitudes, the capacity for failure and for grace, for error and for repair. And sometimes, it takes a crisis of fire and smoke to force those multitudes into the light, where they can, however awkwardly, begin to see each other. If you found this journey from collision to clarity compelling, there are more stories like it waiting. Stories that dive deep into the human complexity behind the simple headlines. Consider subscribing to stay connected. Thanks for watching.